It's 4:30 Singapore time. Let's check the numbers. Asia markets closed sharply lower with the Straits Times index down 2.1% as what's being called the fold enters its fifth month, a spatial anomaly that has created a direct physical border between Singapore's Changi district and the war-torn Ukrainian city of Donetsk. Pacific Maritime reported a 22% revenue decline as shipping insurers refuse coverage near the phenomenon. Lloyd's of London now classifies Singapore's eastern waters as active war zone adjacent, following incidents of Ukrainian military aircraft appearing in tropical airspace. The tech exodus accelerated this week. Digital infrastructure worth $15 billion is relocating to Perth and Sydney as companies flee their proximity to live artillery exchanges, now visible from Singapore office windows. Data center outages from cross-dimensional shockwaves have increased 300% since the spatial connection formed in February. Defense contractor Secure Grid saw shares jump 45% on contracts to monitor the impossible 847-meter border, where Singaporean police now patrol alongside barriers separating them from Russian-controlled territory. European warfare literally across the street from Southeast Asian suburbs. Tourism shows a bizarre split, business travel down 60%, but war zone viewing tourism up 340%. Hotels near the spatial boundary stay booked despite guests hearing nightly artillery fire from their rooms. Singapore's monetary authority calls the economy fundamentally sound despite unprecedented geographical challenges, though emergency reserves have quietly increased 40%. Property values within sight of the Ukrainian conflict zone fell another 8%.
Chapter 2. Faces across the LA. In the first days after the fold, Mirage LA felt like a stage with faceless actors. Singapore on one side, Donetsk on the other, and no script to guide us. The SAF cordoned off the immediate area, while scientists in hazmat suits took measurements nobody understood. Social media filled with blurry photos and conspiracy theories. But slowly, as the initial shock wore off and life resumed its stubborn forward momentum, the faces began to emerge from the crowd. I noticed him first at the Kopitiam near Upper Changi Road, 3 blocks back from the LA itself. An old man wiping tables with methodical precision, humming under his breath. Not Hokkien or Tamil, but something that rolled with Slavic consonants. His work permit identified him as Victor Petrov, 63, originally from Malipul. He'd arrived in Singapore 2 years before the fold on a dependence pass, sponsored by his daughter, who worked for a German logistics firm. But the other uncles at the Kopitiam whispered that he was a staunch Russophile. One of those Ukrainians who never stopped believing that Moscow would come to liberate them from Kiev's fascists. 30 years I wait, he told me one morning, his English thick as kaya, while refilling my coffee cup without being asked. 30 years, and now they are here, just across road. He gestured toward Mirage LA with the practiced sweep of a man who'd been a school teacher before the wars began. My boys will come across. Proper boys, with proper tanks, not these Kiev puppets. His smile wasn't warm. It was expectant, like someone waiting for a long-delayed train. His loyalty belonged neither to Singapore nor to the customers he served, but to an army that existed just beyond reach, separated by razor wire and international law. The other aunties at the Kopitiam avoided him now. They tolerated his politics when Russia was distant, but having actual Russian soldiers visible from the coffee shop window made his enthusiasm feel less like harmless nostalgia and more like a sleeping threat. Another face materialized weeks later, though this one tried hard to remain invisible. A young man, perhaps 25. With the hollow cheeks and watchful eyes common to those who'd seen too much too early. Chechen features, skin bearing the particular pallor that comes from too many nights in basements. He kept to the margins, sleeping rough near East Coast Park, washing in public toilets, buying meals from the cheapest Zicha stores with crumpled $20 notes that looked like they'd been hidden somewhere uncomfortable for a long time. The Malay uncle who ran the satay stand near Marine Parade said the boy's name was Ramzan, though he'd given 3 different names to 3 different people. Chechen, the uncle said, whispering, close enough that I could smell the charcoal smoke in his clothes. Used to fight for Russians in Syria, maybe Chechnya, now hiding from his own people. The irony was cruel. His former comrades were now less than a kilometer away, close enough that he could probably recognize faces through binoculars. Every time a Russian helicopter crossed overhead, they started doing regular patrols along their side of the fold. Ramzan would disappear for days, only to resurface when the aircraft noise died down. He smoked Indonesian Kretek, Gudam Garam, the cheapest brand, and muttered prayers in Arabic between the Chechen words he spoke to himself. I watched him one dawn, standing at the Marine Parade seawall, staring across Mirage Alley with the intensity of someone trying to calculate whether his past would eventually cross that yellow line to find him. But perhaps the most unsettling newcomers were the mercenaries on the Donetsk side, Chinese volunteers, barely out of university, drawn by stories of adventure and decent pay. Through telephoto lenses, sold out at every Simlim Square camera shop within a week of the fold, I could see them clearly. Boys in mismatched gear, some wearing knockoff Adidas tracksuits under their tactical vests, others sporting gaming headphones they somehow convinced the supply sergeants were communications equipment. They shouted to each other in Mandarin, complaining about the cold that shouldn't exist, laughing about how even the instant noodles they brought from Quizhou tasted better than Russian MREs. One evening, I watched through binoculars as they gestured frantically at a Grab food rider who'd approached the checkpoint barrier on our side. The delivery boy held up bags from Crystal Jade. Apparently, they'd figured out how to place online orders for Singaporean food, though getting it across the fence proved more challenging than expected. The guards on both sides eventually worked out a system involving long poles and considerable good humor. More disturbing were the teenage conscripts who began appearing at the fence line after dark. Russian boys, 17 or 18, too young for war but old enough to understand what state censorship had stolen from them. They carried scraps of paper with hand-drawn QR codes, phone numbers written in careful English, even USB drives sealed in plastic bags. eSIM, Singapore SIM card, they whispered, through the razor wire, eyes darting between the Singaporean guards and their own officers. They weren't seeking escape routes or military intelligence, just internet access that hadn't been filtered through Roskomnadzor. They wanted TikTok videos from Taiwan, YouTube channels their government had blocked, even access to uncensored ChatGPT models. One boy showed me a picture on his phone. His girlfriend in Volgograd, taken before the military draft separated them. She uses Telegram, he said. But only Russian Telegram now. I want to send her real pictures. He meant pictures that hadn't been reviewed by military censors. On our side, Singaporeans did what we do best when faced with the impossible. We adapted with practical efficiency and considerable entrepreneurial spirit. Hawker stalls within sight of Mirage Alley started offering border view seating, charging premium prices for tables with direct sight lines of the checkpoints. The auntie at Tian Tian Haneni's chicken rice started serving refugee portions, larger servings sold at cost to anyone who looked like they'd recently fled something. Food delivery apps added Fence Line as a delivery location, though drivers weren't allowed past the final checkpoint. Fitness influencers mapped Strava routes that terminated precisely at the barriers, posting videos tagged #WarViewRun and #FoldFitness. The Singapore Tourism Board quietly removed these from their official Instagram features, but couldn't stop them from going viral internationally. Changi Airport gift shops began selling "I Survived the Fold" t-shirts alongside the usual mullion keychains. In Parliament, heated debates raged over humanitarian exceptions. Should Singapore open limited crossing points for medical emergencies? What about separated families? Minister Shanmugam gave measured responses about studying the situation and consulting international law, while opposition MPs demanded clearer policies. Meanwhile, construction crews worked around the clock to reinforce the Changi area with additional surveillance equipment, though they disguised the cameras as modern art installations and the motion sensors as decorative lighting. The strangest adaptation came from the Singaporean side of the fence itself. Office workers in Changi Business Park began taking smoking breaks that coincided with shift changes on the Donnet side. They didn't talk. Sound doesn't carry well across the temperature differential. But they acknowledged each other with nods, shared gestures, the universal language of people trapped in jobs they didn't choose. I watched the Singaporean accountant hold up her phone to show a Russian conscript her baby photos. He responded by showing her a picture of his dog. Even the children adapted with the peculiar resilience of youth. Primary school students from nearby Changi Primary began including the Donnet side in their geography projects, interviewing their grandparents about wars they never expected to see from their bedroom windows. The Ministry of Education quietly updated social studies curriculum to address unprecedented geopolitical realities in our immediate environment. Everywhere I looked, humanity found ways to leak across borders that were supposed to be absolute, not through diplomacy or force, but through the small persistences of daily life. Cravings for familiar food, longing for uncensored communication, the simple human need to be seen and acknowledged by another person, even if that person happened to live in a war zone. Standing there in the evenings, watching the small exchanges through the fence, I began to understand that Mirage Alley wasn't just asking what it means to have neighbors. It was demonstrating that proximity creates a relationship whether we want it or not, whether it's convenient or not, whether our government